This is Right to Life Radio. And now, here's your host, John Gerardi.
Well, Gavin Newsom is ticking off Planned Parenthood because of his budget. The numbers just don't add up, much like the numbers don't add up with Colton and Jonathan's obsession with buying drinks from Panera, as we were discussing over the break. Jonathan Keller from California Family Council here with his, as every episode, monster Panera drink, which I'm holding up for all of you watching on YouTube.
Just call me Jonathan Sip Club.
There we go. I'm sort of bummed that Jonathan hasn't been getting the iced teas from Panera that have so much caffeine in them that they basically they killed a guy. Anyway, let's talk about a guy who's having some problems making the math work.
Ah, yes.
And that is the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, who is apparently angering Planned Parenthood because of California's budgetary woes, in spite of the fact that he's given them more money than they know what to do with. This is a piece from the American Spectator, written by Ellie Gardy Holmes. California has reached a point where it is, on a fundamental level, fiscally unsound. The budget deficit, which by one estimate accounts to $73 billion, is not the result of an off year that happened to generate lower revenues. No, this is a structural problem. The disparity between tax revenues and spending is so vast that the entire system, celebrated by liberals as a model of progressive governance, is a house of cards. And it was all built by Governor Gavin Newsom, who chose extravagant progressive policies over maintaining a sustainable budget. A lot of this has to do with political issues that are slightly out of the purview of what we do here at Right to Life of Central California, but the math is the math.
That's right.
Jonathan, here we keep having the state budget just kind of keeps up on building. We've had massive deficits for the last 2 years, basically every year where we haven't had huge infusions of COVID money. Federal COVID money. So.
Surprise, surprise.
There you go.
It's papered over a lot of the, as it says, the structural problems and structural issues, and it's allowed you to kind of go, oh, no, everything's fine. Everything looks great.
Poor old Jerry Dyer is quite aware of this problem at this point, given that Gavin Newsom promised him $250 million for infrastructure improvements for downtown Fresno back in the bumper days of 2022, and now... oh, let's delay that by a year. Oh, how about let's delay that another year, Jerry? So anyway, now, what does this have to do with abortion? So lavish spending might have initially pleased Newsom's constituencies and endeared him to radical California Democrats, but it has led to a day of reckoning. Those who once loved him because he rained money on them are now turning against him as he implements cuts to their programs. So the story goes on to talk about the California Teachers Association. They are really angry at Newsom for what they perceive as cuts. And usually what happens when a media story talks about budget cuts, what they really are doing is baseline budgeting, where it's a decrease in the expected amount of increase, but it's still like at least an increase or staying pat. It's like, no, that's not a cut. If you're actually spending more, it's not a cut. Anyway, I think probably some of that's happening. In a perhaps even more surprising fallout, the article continues, Planned Parenthood, which has also benefited enormously under Gavin Newsom's governorship, has also turned against him. The president of Planned Parenthood Affiliates of California, Jody Hicks, blasted Newsom in a series of posts on X, aka Twitter, last month. Over healthcare funding decreases, the governor announced in his May revisal of the state budget. So for those who don't know how California budgetary legislative stuff works, the governor introduces a budget in January, and then in May, he introduces a revised budget, the May revise, as it's called, or the May revisal, as it's called, which basically takes into account, okay, well, what tax, it's after, the April 15th tax filing, so what revenues has the state gotten in, on which we have to, we have to make the budget work based on the actual amount of money that we have received in. We can't just, print money in California. We can't spend indefinitely into the red. So
we're not supposed to.
Well, you're not supposed to, yeah. There's more limits on the ability of a state to do that than, say, the federal government in Washington, D.C. So basically, you have Jody Hicks coming out, and I dug up the tweets from Jody Hicks, who is again the head of basically Planned Parenthood affiliates of California. So this is kind of this is Planned Parenthood's kind of California political advocacy arm, Planned Parenthood Action California, which I'm guessing means it's probably. What do you think that would be, Jonathan? If it's called Planned Parenthood Action, that usually means it's the 501c4,
probably
right?
The C4, and it could be their PAC, but my guess is,
probably their C4.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which means that they can overtly spend money on electing candidates, not just wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Exactly. Yeah. So a 501c4, for those who don't know, it's tax exempt, but donations to it are not tax deductible, and they are allowed to engage in direct support of candidates for office, political parties, and they have more freedom than a 501c3 does to advocate for legislation. So Jody Hicks, who's the head of that wing of Planned Parenthood for California, writes, Planned Parenthood in California is deeply disappointed by the proposal in the governor's May revise that will jeopardize access to not just sexual and reproductive care, but quality, affordable health care across the board for the nearly 15 million Californians who rely on Medi-Cal. While we recognize the current state budget pressures, it seems like she's not recognizing it, we must ensure all Californians, no matter where they live or how much money they earn, can fulfill their essential need for health care. This includes supporting our state's safety net providers so that they are able to care for their patients. We look forward to working with our partners, the legislature, and the GO, the governor. So the budget reflects our state's values as a reproductive freedom state. A reproductive freedom state. I love that euphemism where people say, well, California is so dedicated to reproductive freedom. No, they're dedicated to, California has such a commitment to reproductive health care. No, they have a commitment to one thing, abortion. Yep. That's it. The budget that reflects our state's values as a reproductive freedom state and commits to principles of health equity as it relates to meaningful access to care for the Medi-Cal population. Buzzword, 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 buzzword. All right. So, the piece from the American Spectator goes on. Such comments are far removed from the tight relationship the abortion group previously had with Newsom, who in 2019 doubled the state's spending on, quote, reproductive health from $50 million to $100 million, a significant amount of which went to Planned Parenthood. So, Jonathan Keller, California Family Council, what do we think of this? Are we buying that Planned Parenthood is actually mad at the governor? Do you think the governor is going to fold? I mean, what are we actually seeing here as far as... I don't think Planned Parenthood is about to go to the poorhouse here.
I think that Planned Parenthood is obviously, sadly...
They say that they recognize the budgetary pressures that the state is under when clearly they don't. If everyone has the attitude they have, then there's no way that anything will ever get cut, ever.
Right. And I think that it is clear that they are in a financial crunch in terms of financial money. And I think that there's a...
Well, as opposed to any other kind of money?
Well, right. Financial resources, I should say. They're in a crunch. But...
Got some of that financial money.
Yeah.
I'm just going to make fun of you for the whole rest of the show. That's right.
The trick is that, John, I think Planned Parenthood, of course, loves very little more. I mean, one of the few things they might love more than actually doing abortion is receiving money from the government to do abortion.
They love money. That's one thing about Planned Parenthood that is quite clear when you kind of scratch the surface of Planned Parenthood. You find an organization with some very easy to diagnose motives. They really do love making money.
If you go back and you look at the videos, this constantly sticks with me that David Daleiden did when he was talking to Dr. I think it was Mary Gatter from, I think it was Southern California. And they were talking about the great financial compensation that they would be able to offer his organization, the Center for Medical Progress, and the fake group that he also had set up.
Right. So this was David Daleiden posing that he would sell the bodies of aborted children, that he could set up an arrangement for Planned Parenthood. Yes, so he could purchase the bodies of aborted children from abortion clinics as a way for them to make money,
Right.
which is illegal.
Right. But hey, look, we're going to scratch your back. You're going to provide us these, this fetal tissue that we're going to be able to use. You're going to have an order list of all these things that we want. And we'll supply those to research facilities, and we'll get a little. They'll get the stuff that they need, paid for by government contracts. You will get a
Thank you, Anthony Fauci.
Yeah, you will get as a Planned Parenthood, you'll get some great compensation for the work, and we, the middlemen, will get a nice little tidy profit in the middle. And Dr. Mary Gatter said on camera, talking about how much money they would possibly make. She was the one who infamously said, "Great, I want a Lamborghini."
Yes, yeah, and when you look at the way that is, I do remember her. Yeah,
and she was the medical director for Planned Parenthood Los Angeles.
There we go. Yeah. So they care about money, and when you understand the financial dynamics of the kinds of services Planned Parenthood does and doesn't do, and in which clinics they do certain services and don't do other services. Like, they don't do or for the longest time, I'll double check if they do right now. The Planned Parenthood clinic on Fulton Street doesn't provide prenatal care services. Why? Well, prenatal care services don't make money. There's no real big billable service or procedure or drug or anything that you're doing. It takes up provider time. It takes up exam room space. It stinks. Financially, it's a loser. So basically, and if someone doesn't have good insurance, it's even more of a loser. So they don't offer prenatal care at. Well, it sounds like maybe there's some kind of prenatal and postpartum services. Maybe they're starting to. Anyway, they have pregnancy tests. That's what they have. Okay. Which is not the same as a prenatal visit. They have pregnancy tests. Yes. Okay. So they don't offer that at the Fulton Street clinic because everyone who goes to Fulton Street is on Medi-Cal, so they lose money. Right. They do offer it over by Fresno State, where more of the people going there are Fresno State students on mom and dad's health insurance, so they can get a better reimbursement. So, why is every Planned Parenthood clinic all of a sudden doing transgender hormone therapy?
Ding, ding, ding.
The reason they're doing it is because it makes a ton of money. It's not very labor intensive. It doesn't take a lot of provider time, and you get a big fat reimbursement for these hormones that people going through a transgender transition need these hormones on a very regular, consistent basis, and they can bill for it every single time. So Planned Parenthood loves money. The fact that they're criticizing Newsom like this, I'm not sure if this is just a negotiating pose to kind of squeeze every last dollar out of him humanly possible, but it just seems to me like they're not acknowledging the reality. Now, the pool of Medi-Cal people is ever expanding, and the pool of, now that Medi-Cal is open to people regardless of their immigration status now, the pool of Medi-Cal patients is growing and growing and growing, and the amount of money to sustain it is not growing commensurately.
Right. So John, let me tell you something here, and I want to make sure. Do we have to go to a break yet, or are we?
You got a minute?
Okay. I'll tell you this.
Or we can just go to break right now.
Okay.
And we can save
when we
it for the
come
next
back, this will be a tease. I will tell you what Gavin Newsom's budget has to do in common with the ex-wives of Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos.
Oh my goodness! All right. Well, we're going to learn all about the jilted ex-wives of the Silicon Valley, who love giving massive donations to horrible pro-abortion causes. And we'll also talk about whom does Gavin Newsom need to keep happy in all this. That is next on Right to Life Radio. Back with Right to Life Radio. All right, Jonathan, you left us on a tease. Gavin Newsom's been taking some heat from Planned Parenthood in California because his budget doesn't involve enough goodies for Planned Parenthood. So, but you led us with a tease about what the Governor Newsom's new budget has to do with Melinda Gates
And Mackenzie Scott.
And Mackenzie Scott, the ex-wife of Jeff Bezos, the divorcees of the two wealthiest men in the world.
Club.
The First Wives Club.
I think it's First Wives for Jeff Bezos.
For two of the three wealthiest guys in the world.
Yes. So I think, John, to your point, is this, is there really a fallout between Gavin Newsom and Jody Hicks? I think
Jody Hicks being the president of Planned Parenthood's California kind of political wing.
Yeah. So I think there's a two-part answer to this. Number one, I think if you get them together at a cocktail party in San Francisco and they're hanging out with Dianne Feinstein and
Nancy.
Not Dianne Feinstein anymore.
Well, I was going to say, they're hanging out with Dianne Feinstein. With Nancy Pelosi.
Nancy Pelosi and maybe Kamala Harris and all these other people and the rich, wealthy, high society socialite types that love to fund all these causes. I think
we'll talk more about them later on in the segment.
They'll probably have a perfectly pleasant cocktail party. They'll sit around. I don't think there is any true bad blood between Planned Parenthood and Gavin Newsom.
Right.
My guess is that there's a two-part reason they're doing this. Number one is they do love money and they want to try to set a stake in the ground to say, oh, this is horrible, and don't you dare push back any farther. And they can kind of negotiate a little bit. When Newsom says this, then there's a big outcry from post-abortion groups or pro-abortion groups, and they go, all right, well, okay, I guess that's true, and they kind of can go back a little bit and publicly negotiate.
Well, and the California Teachers Association, I think, did the same thing. So part of this story was talking about, so this was a story in the American Spectator that we were going through, written by L.E. Gardy Holmes, talking about how Newsom is so crunched in this budget that he's ticking off these traditional, stalwart liberal supporters that he has, particularly Planned Parenthood and the teachers' unions. So the teachers' unions, even they took out advertisements in L.A. saying, tell lawmakers and Governor Newsom to pass a state budget that protects public schools. And then this led to a negotiation where Governor Newsom conceded stuff and gave them more money.
So I think that's number one. Number one, there is the very obvious of, hey, we want to push back and we're going to call out Newsom and push back on this.
And try to get as much money wrung out of the man as we can.
Right. So that's number one. And I think that's probably legitimate. And I understand why they're doing it. I of course, don't agree with it, but I understand why they're doing it. Yeah. Number two is this is public signaling to their small dollar donors to be like, oh my gosh, wow. This is under these abortion rights are under assault. I care about this.
Yes,
I should make a small dollar contribution to Planned Parenthood because look, they're in crisis. They don't have enough money. I better whip out my checkbook, whip out my credit card, and give.
That's the thing. If you're Planned Parenthood in California, how do you get people to have a sense of alarm? Like there's nothing. You're in the best situation possible. You've got the most compliant state government in the country. You're getting the most money, the most funding. How do you get? Yeah, I mean, you need to do some kind of. You and I have sort of joked as nonprofit directors about like we don't like sending our supporters the email that says, we need your help, urgent. We need your donations, urgent. Which
you don't want to lie, and you don't want to
you don't want to. But Planned Parenthood's not above trying to, play the victim card.
100%.
Sort of like reminds me of the students at Columbia who think that they're being victims of political persecution or something because they get in trouble for not going to class.
So that's number two. Number three, and this brings us to the T's. In addition to that, I think this is a great leverage point to be able to go to philanthropists, quote unquote, like Mackenzie Scott, who is the ex-wife of Jeff Bezos, or Melinda Gates, who is the ex-wife of Bill Gates, and say, oh my goodness, look at this. There is this huge jeopardy of care, and we really need a serious infusion of cash to be able to fight back against all of these, both the bans from Republicans and red states, and also we need to fight back against math because things are very difficult.
Right.
So 2 years ago, Mackenzie Scott, in the immediate aftermath of, or actually it was before the Dobbs decision, actually, in March, I think it was.
So that's probably right around when Alito's draft got leaked.
Well, it was before.
Right
because
before.
His draft was in May, but this was a couple months before. So she gave the largest gift in Planned Parenthood's entire history. She gave $275 million to Planned Parenthood.
Jeez Louise.
And just to put it in perspective, that was essentially almost, originally that was, I think at the time, that was close to about half of all the government money they got, period.
Yeah.
But now you've got this money, you've got this massive amount of money. There's very few, if any, strings attached. You can use it for all sorts of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
So that's bad enough. But then, John, just a couple days ago, I saw a report in, I'll send it along here. This is the BBC, but the more I think inflammatory title that I like is from the Catholic news agency CNA. Melinda Gates, a Catholic, it says, to give millions to fund abortion throughout the world. And it says Melinda Gates' high dollar funding of abortion throughout the world offers what pro-life leaders say is a grim reminder of what pro-life advocates are up against. Gates, who has written fondly of her Catholic upbringing, said last week she was giving multi-million-dollar donations to abortion-supporting groups. Among the richest people in the world, she has reportedly a net worth of $11 billion.
Yeah.
And so she founded this new thing. In addition to the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, she and Bill Gates got divorced in 2021. But a couple of years before she got divorced, she funded this new organization called Pivotal Ventures. And it sounds like, according to this, it says that she is going to be giving just within the United States, it's, I think, around $200 million to abortion-supporting organizations.
Jeez Louise.
So I think that a lot of times, if you see a story like this, if Newsom just quietly said, oh, yeah, times are tough, if Planned Parenthood doesn't say anything, they don't get the potential pushback on more government money. They don't get the potential pushback on small dollar donors or small dollar activism and door knockers.
Yeah.
But
which they want in an election year. They want.
But but this way, if they do a huge hue and cry, then they can take a copy of this press release and kind of have their top activists and top funders pass it along to the development directors can pass it along to their grant writers and say, oh my goodness, did you hear this horrible story out of California? They're in crisis. They really would be helpful if you could peel off a few more Benjamins for.
There we go. That makes, Jonathan, that makes total sense. And this is the ecosystem in which Planned Parenthood is operating. They are trying their darndest to squeeze every little dollar out of this thing. And that's, that kind of goes to show, like, that goes to show that, like, for all that is said about, abortion's only a small portion of what they do. No. Abortion is the cornerstone of everything.
Yep.
Because this money doesn't come in without abortion. All right, we will be back with more on Right to Life Radio right after this. We're talking about this story from the American Spectator, how Gavin Newsom is ticking off Planned Parenthood and other stalwart Democrat supporters by his just sort of need to do the math and come up with a more balanced budget than the current budget, which shows California, by some estimates, $73 billion in the hole. And so Planned Parenthood is getting angry. Jonathan, I think very astutely, is hypothesizing that this is performative and designed to spur Melinda Gates and Jeff Bezos' ex-wife, Mackenzie Scott. There we go. No relation to Michael Scott. Into giving tons and tons and tons of money to Planned Parenthood. So I want to raise this question from Gavin, from the perspective of our buddy, good old Gavin.
Right.
Good old Gavin Newsom. All right. Newsom kind of has to walk a fine line because his actual job is to be the governor of California, and he kind of can't just spend absolutely into oblivion. The buck does sort of, I think you and I have always noticed this about the governors of California, that to a certain extent, they have to be the adult in the room, even when the members of the Assembly and the state Senate don't have to be. Like there's a certain degree of responsibility, especially for the budget, that the governor sort of has to exercise by virtue of his office that individual Assembly members and state senators just cannot care about to the same extent. They care about their communities, their funding for their communities and their bills and things like that. They just don't, by the virtue of their office, they just don't care about the big picture to the same extent that the governor does. So, nonetheless, though, So Newsom has to make these sort of tough choices. He has to disappoint people by not funding things the extent that they want to be funded. He has to leave poor Jerry Dyer. leave poor Jerry Dyer at the altar. You know, he's still waiting for that $200 million in city infrastructure funding. Good luck, Jerry. I just don't think it's coming. All right. Anyway, not to get on the make a John Gerardi show point, but yeah, I don't think that $200 million is coming anytime soon.
I think you're probably right.
I guess we'll see. So whom though does Gavin Newsom have to placate? Whom does he need to keep happy? That is the question. And I think my hypothesis about Governor Newsom this whole time has been, well, he's kind of got the biggest case of senioritis known to man. I think this whole second term, he's just going through the motions.
He really would rather be running for president this year.
Oh my gosh, yeah. He didn't even really give a State of the Union, the State of the State.
He still hasn't.
Yeah.
And the craziest thing, John, I have to tell you, if you've not seen this, it's one of the most insane. He got asked about this in a press conference a couple weeks ago.
So for those who don't know, the State of the State is basically like the president gives the State of the Union address.
Yep.
The governor gives a State of the State address. And generally the governor does it every year. And for some reason, Newsom just hasn't done it. So he was asked.
Why hasn't he done it, John? Why you ask?
I do not know.
Well, there were some reporters that were actually curious about that, and they said, "Hey, so what gives?" Well, you know, we've been in a discussion with the legislature. You know, we're trying to get our schedules to work out. You know, we just haven't been able to come to a time that's mutually beneficial, where you know we're both. You're down the freaking street.
You live in Sacramento. You're right there.
You literally, if you're actually in your office, you have to walk across the hall. There is no requirement that there are multiple people there. There's no requirement that even...
Just go.
Yeah. No.
Just go on a day when they're in session.
We haven't been able to schedule it. I'm like, this is at a time he hasn't been able to schedule the State of the State at the same time when he has gone, I think, out of the country multiple times.
Yeah.
For different things. I'm sorry. This shouldn't turn into the angry at bashing Gavin Newsom episode.
Well, we're just making the point here that Gavin Newsom really does not GAF give a fig about many, many things right now. I think it's fair to say he's a little bit going through the motions as far as his role as governor because he wants to run for president. This is not his end goal. He wants to run for president. If he's not going to run for president this year, you know, if there's not going to be some grand Democrat switcheroo to switch out Joe Biden for Gavin Newsom at the convention, which I think is highly unlikely, if he's not running this year, he's going to run in 2028. All right. So how do you do that? Well, you keep certain people with a lot of money happy. And I sincerely believe that so much of what Governor Newsom has done has been very clearly oriented towards keeping that group of elite California donors who are major national Democrat fundraisers. They're the reason why Kamala Harris is vice president of the United States. They're the reason that that Newsom himself is in office where he is. This old money, they're the reason why Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of the House for so many years. She was a very good fundraiser because these people were in her back door. All this old San Francisco, Silicon Valley money. Newsom needs to keep them happy. And you can see that in the performative stuff he does. Going to Florida to talk about how terrible Ron DeSantis is. Tweeting out tweet after tweet after tweet after about how Greg Abbott is terrible and Texas is terrible and Ron DeSantis is terrible and debating Ron DeSantis and doing all this stuff to really loudly signal certain things to his constituency, which is big money donors. Big money donors who hate Ron DeSantis with every fiber of their being, who are, and we've talked about them before on the show, that I think this characteristic, like, these are not Bernie Sanders people.
No.
They like money. They do not.
They make a lot of it.
They make a lot of it.
They don't just have 3 houses like Bernie Sanders. They might have 30 houses.
And critically, they want that SALT deduction.
Yes.
They want that state and local taxes deduction, which they made sure that Chuck Schumer passed. so they like money.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want the government reaching into their pocket that far as Bernie Sanders would reach, as far as AOC would reach. And so they make up for their sort of phony fiscal liberalism with a renewed, redoubled, retripled, quintupled commitment to social liberalism. And they support the whole panoply of the LGBT agenda, and they massively, massively, massively support free, unregulated, free access, abortion on demand. They give their whole weight of support to the pro-abortion cause. So, is Newsom ticking those people off with these budgetary things? I don't know. I think he should probably be a little concerned when Planned Parenthood kind of calls him out publicly, because I do, and correct me if you think this is off base at all, Jonathan, but I think very often, like, why does the Sierra Club have so much power? It's not because of the Sierra Club. It's because of the gazillionaire donors who like the Sierra Club.
Yes.
And that's why they have power.
I
don't know that Planned Parenthood necessarily has so much power as much as Melinda Gates has a lot of power.
Mm-hmm.
Mackenzie Scott has a lot of power. The huge donors who give to Planned Parenthood, Gavin Newsom needs to keep those people happy as well.
And I think a difference, John, is that Planned Parenthood and some of these other groups, how do I put this? Abortion is, I think, unfortunately, tragically, as we have seen in Ohio and in Kansas and in other places, tragically, abortion is, as a legal ballot issue, I think abortion...
It's a winning issue for them.
It is a winning issue, and I think it is more popular on a ballot issue among a lot of the general populace.
Yeah.
But I think that there are a lot of people that are willing to go in and say, I just kind of either don't care, or I'm kind of quasi-libertarian, or I'm like, maybe someone needs it and whatever. I think there's a lot of people that are like that, but I don't think there are as many of those people that when they walk out of the voting booth, if a canvasser from Planned Parenthood comes up to them and says, "Hey, thank you so much for voting. I'm just doing an interview,
exit poll. Yeah.
Exit poll. I'm curious, how did you vote on Amendment 1 in Ohio?" Oh, well, I voted yes. Oh, really? Why'd you vote yes? Well, I mean, I'm pro-life. I think that abortion, I think that life begins at conception, but I just think, it should be between a woman and her doctor. There were literally people that said that in a lot of the... Right. But if that same canvasser then says, "Great, I'm so encouraged to hear this. Would you like to make a monthly donation to Planned Parenthood starting today?"
No.
Oh, no. Are you kidding? I don't want to pay for that.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of people will have this very kind of laissez-faire about the legality of it, but in their heart of hearts, they don't really actually like abortion.
No, they don't want to. They don't want to get that involved. Yeah,
and I think there's probably a much bigger disparity between. I think funding for abortion is a very elitist type of a thing,
right?
Whereas if you
these people love, and Gavin Newsom's crowd loves that.
And if you compare it with, I think maybe one of the more popular large interest groups that is always decried on the right, like the National Rifle Association, for example,
right.
I don't think that the National Rifle Association is usually getting nearly the same level of mega corporate donors and sponsorships as Planned Parenthood is.
Right.
It is,
I agree.
That is a lot more.
I think a lot higher percentage of
grassroots.
People who sign up for NRA memberships. Yeah,
right.
Exactly. All right. When we return, the key to President Biden's reelection strategy is abortion. We'll talk about that, and we'll talk about how the various ways in which Republicans are moronically playing into the Democrats' hands. Next on Right to Life Radio. As election 2024 gets closer and closer, the Biden folks are... You're starting to hear a little bit more unease in Democrat circles about President Biden's reelection chances. You're hearing all of a sudden there's a Wall Street Journal story discussing whether and how physically and mentally fit President Biden is. You're hearing more rumblings like that. You're hearing more people looking at the polling data from states like Arizona and Nevada and Georgia and Pennsylvania and Michigan, all these different states where Trump is all of a sudden either super close or winning. Nevada, bizarrely, even though Trump lost it, twice, Trump is massively ahead in Nevada for some reason. So the only thing, and what we're hearing more, and there's these different stories interviewing different Democrat strategists and et cetera, the only thing Democrats have going for them is abortion. And what is driving Jonathan and me crazy are the ways in which I feel like Republicans are directly playing into Democrats' hands. First with, which we talked about a couple weeks ago on the show, the idiotic Ted Cruz Katie Britt bill to guarantee a federal right to in vitro fertilization, something that was not being threatened at all, a bizarre, overwrought response to a 1-week news story about the Alabama Supreme Court saying that, yeah, if you negligently destroy IVF embryos, then someone can be held liable for that, which I don't even think is a very anti-IVF thing for them to have held. It's now extending to there's a debate about protecting the right to contraception. So I want to ask you about this, Jonathan, because I think you've been following this. What is going on with this right now? The Democrats have introduced legislation. What is going on with this story?
So I was just looking at this report here, John, and I think that, as you mentioned, you got everything exactly right. I think that there is bizarrely this sense that Republicans are so panicked over anything that could hurt them electorally. They've seen what's happened with the abortion issue post Dobbs, and they are looking, I think, for boogeyman around the corner. They are saying, "Oh no, we're going to have." We're going to get attacked over IVF after the Alabama case happened. They said, "Oh no, we got to do something," and now they're, like you said, they're seeing these small little issues on contraception because Schumer and other people are trying to get them to take hard votes.
Right. Well, so you've got Schumer has introduced a Contraception Protection Act, but now you've got Joni Ernst, the Republican senator from Iowa,
which is just
she's introducing her own contraception protection bill on Monday that looks to increase access to over-the-counter birth control ahead of a planned Senate vote on legislation that seeks to codify federal protections for contraception. Now, first of all, there's the lack of sort of engaging with the question that a lot of hormonal contraception actually has abortifacient effects to it.
Correct.
So there's absolutely no engagement with that.
In the Hobby Lobby case before the Supreme Court, the reason why Hobby Lobby was deemed to not have to comply with Obamacare's contraception mandate was because they argued, hey, some of these are abortifacient, so you shouldn't have to make me.
I mean, IUDs, that's all an IUD is basically making the uterine wall inhospitable to a new embryo implanting.
So this new bill, John, the co-sponsor from Joni Ernst, it is co-sponsored by her fellow Iowa Senator Chuck Grassley from Iowa, Shelley Moore Capito from West Virginia, Steve Daines from Montana, who is the former chair of the Pro-Life Caucus. Todd Young in Indiana, Tom Tillis in North Carolina, Mitch McConnell in Kentucky.
Right.
John, I'm shocked that apparently he thinks this is a federal issue.
Oh, yeah. Again, all these issues, abortion, not a federal issue, but contraception, IVF, all this stuff.
And then, John, the last two I'll say, last three, James Risch from Idaho, but then John Cornyn from Texas and Ted Cruz from Texas.
Again, and this is, let me just end with this. This is so stupid politically.
Yep.
Instead of just ignoring Democrats who say Republicans want to take away the right to IVF, Republicans want to take away the right to contraception, they do this performative nonsense of affirming these things about those practices that are genuinely bad and thereby completely undercut their entire pro-life advocacy, their entire pro-life witness as a whole. And they give oxygen to these stories that should just be gone in 5 minutes. That'll do it for Right to Life Radio. We will see you next time on Power Talk.